All right, it looks like we're live here. So in just a moment, we're going to be going and joining my wife, Laura, and we're going on a wild edible plant walk today. So Chris Gilmore here from chrisoutdoors.ca, as well as wildmuskoka.com. Wild Muskoka is our wild foraging. So we make sustainably wild forage foods and drinks, and we also do mushroom and edible plant walks. And it just so happens today we have a whole bunch of folks over on the homestead here, and my wife, Laura, is leading them on an edible plant walk. So we're going to go join her in just a moment and take you on a little bit of a tour. So these are participants that have signed up for a one-day workshop to go and get an intro to foraging. And you're going to get just a bit of a sneak peek. We'll maybe go follow her for about 20 minutes or so. I can't promise that the audio and video will be perfect as I move further away from the Wi-Fi, but we'll give it a shot. One of Laura and I's goals this year is actually to do a little bit more live streaming and video, just to give you a little bit of a glimpse at kind of what our lifestyle looks like as professional foragers, outdoors folks, homesteaders, things of that nature. I wonder if anyone knows this plant beside me right there, though. This is a gorgeous one that's just started flowering inside of our homestead right now. That's our bloodroot flower right there. And we've got some Solomon seal coming up over here. All kinds of fun stuff coming up. But why don't we go over and we'll see Laura right now. So I'm just going to walk over. I'm going to kind of sneak in quietly because she's actually teaching this class live. If anyone has questions while we're going, feel free to post them. But yeah, we'll go and watch Laura right now. So we'll be there in just a second, folks.
We will critter the dandelion flowers. So that's like basically battering them. Mm-hmm. But one, but I'll do like a sweet one. So when you do the egg, put lemon in the egg, and then I will do the crispy panko batter. Mm-hmm. So then you have lemon in the egg, you do the dip, and then the panko, and then fry, and then drizzle them with honey. So good, like just a different way to think about, and it's almost like a dessert. I had like a cayenne infused honey too that I did, so it was like spicy honey. But yeah, that's just like, like zucchini flowers, but also thinking of it as a kind of a fun dessert. The important thing to remember though is that the dandelion flowers, you guys ever notice that they close up at night? So when you pick them, they'll still close up at night in your fridge. So if you want to do that dish, you have to pick them and do it the same day. Cool. Otherwise, you'll be very disappointed by the fact they all close up, and then it's not quite the same when you try to fritter them. Wow. But yeah, that's a few. I feel like of some of the like maybe lesser talked about uses of the dandelion. So the crown. Yeah, and this is like I chose for some reason the smallest dandelion plant to show you. When I start harvesting the roots, like kind of next week, we'll definitely be doing another two of those green crowns, and then saving all those little buds. And I have samples of the buds at the end of the walk. Just like basically most pickling, and then it's like, and then they get thrown on salads and like lots of little things. A lot of times they end up being shared in classes like this, or like their idea of like a caper. The idea of a caper. So the other little plant I want to show on the lawn, because it's a very common one, you mentioned it, is plantain. So again, dandelion's non-native, plantain's non-native. We've so far talking about all non-native plants. So plantain is here and here and here and here and here and here.
I didn't know that's what that was.
I was thinking of bananas.
I know.
Yeah. So this is Plantago Majora. So that's this, and it's another name for it is white man's foot, because it always shows up in compacted soils where settlers live. So it's growing in what's called a Basil Rosette. So all the leaves will always grow from one central base. And then the leaves are these kind of just like oval shape. Sometimes they'll have a bit of a teeth, but most often they're pretty smooth. Let's see, these leaves are young. Oh yeah, it's going to show. So when you break a plantain leaf, see how it has those strings? Oh, yeah. That's a key ID feature. This is actually one of the plants that I will teach really young kids because it has this really tactile thing that kids can like show you that they have the right You technically can eat the young greens, as they're not like my favorite. I definitely would throw some into salads, but the one really fun use I discovered about maybe 2 years ago was I'll harvest the leaves up until about July. So you want them a little bit big. Like I'll wait till they get a bit bigger than this, but by kind of like August, September, they're getting pretty tough and leathery. So when they're still kind of tender, and when I say tender, think about when we're shopping at the grocery store, we all have a good innate sense of what fresh and like not so fresh looks like. So use that sense of looking for leaves that look fresh. I marinate them in a little bit of soy sauce and sesame oil and then dehydrate them.
Whoa.
And they make chips.
Whoa.
And like we'll like just crush a whole bowl, eating more than I tell you should when I said eat the pomegranate.
That'd be fun to have a plantain banana chip and then your plantain chip side by side.
Yeah, there you go. All the snacks.
Yeah. I used to actually put them on pizzas when I used to guide up north. When we were out on the trail, we'd make trail pizzas in the cast iron. We'd actually put plantain leaves on the pizza.
that's fun.
Yeah, kind of like putting basil on.
Yeah, so you don't have plantain in backcountry Manitoba.
Pardon me?
You didn't have plantain in
This
or,
plantain.
sorry, you didn't have basil. In
No, we didn't have
Blackville.
basil, but we would find this on the portage trails sometimes. So
Yeah.
we'd put it on the pizzas. So
Yeah.
Wow.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And then they will send out actually these are stems from the plantain last year. And they've already dropped all their seeds. These are probably all the plantain seeds. But the seeds that form, it's actually really interesting. There's the seed, and then each seed is inside of a husk. The husk is the same thing that Metamucil is made of, fiber.
Yeah.
So I've actually harvested the seeds before. I'll just like when the little seeds are all along here, I'll just like go along and like zip, and they like all come off. And I've dried them, and I've just added the seeds to like multi-grain muffins and bread.
You could probably use it like a vegan alternative to an egg, like for
Oh,
like a flax,
yeah.
like a
That's a
flax
good
egg.
idea.
oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I would
Yeah,
think
so
so.
like if you ground some of it,
Yeah.
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 So they're definitely like and in an abundance. Like last year I left like in the vegetable garden I had like one of the paths were just full of plantain. So I just left that one path full of the plantain and I just used that as my little harvesting patch. Because here in the lawn they get kind of trampled, so I typically will try to when I find like a few nice big plants, I'll just kind of let them in our garden. We kind of have like we do like the beds. So I'll cultivate the top of the bed, and then I tend to let the sides and the like edges of the garden paths be some of my like most favorite useful plants because here they'll get trampled and the dog's out. But in the garden I can actually like tend some of them and let them like kind of grow them like as if they just came in on their own, but I can like guard them a little bit and tend them to actually be something I'm going to harvest from. And then it has some cool like first aid uses, like if you get stung by a bee. Doesn't work as well for black flies, mosquitoes, believe me, I've tried. But something that injects you with venom, like a bee, if I find a plantain leaf and chew it up and put it on, it will, it actually has the action of drawing out. So it will draw out the toxin. And I've definitely had significant night and day difference of swelling in a bee or wasp sting using plantain or not. So super good one, just a little first aid use there. And there's lots and lots, like every plant we're going to talk about, there's like guaranteed more uses, but it's almost like every one of these plants we could do a whole class on. Right. I'll leave it there. There's lots more you can learn about plantain.
Sorry, if you were stung by a bee, do you like kind of apply it to the
Yeah,
wound,
so
or
I would
you
take the leaf. So what generally I do, because you need to crush this up. So I get stuck. Like, oh, I just got stung.
Yeah.
I'm gonna grab. So I'll calm and I'll find a clean like a leaf.
Using that exact voice.
Yep. I'll chew it. And then we call this a spit poultice. So the idea is that, I mean, sure, you want to find two rocks and smash it between to not touch it. But the idea is that you just need to get it broken up. And then I'll actually like replace that a few times if you can. Or just like, if you got to keep moving on, just throw a Band-Aid on it. Something just to get the idea is you need to get it kind of broken up so that the juices of the leaf kind of can get in, and it has that drawing action.
What's it taste like?
Lettuce. Yeah, it doesn't really taste like much.
Would you have, so if you're adding that to a salad, it's like blanch and get the
No,
blanch out,
these
just
ones,
straight up.
the young ones, you can eat raw.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could definitely eat them raw. They really don't taste like much.
And so when they sell it at the farmer's market, is it the young ones? Is that what you were saying?
Oh yeah, you were saying people sell.
Yeah.
That is incredible to think of selling plantain. These ones.
What a ripoff.
I mean, I sell like. I mean, I have a wild. I sell pine needles, so. Maybe
Yeah. I know.
I do sell pine needles. Yeah, but it's interesting to think of, right? And I mean, these ones are super small. They will get really big. Like the plantains that grow here in front of the house, where we're like not walking on them all the time. The leaves will get this big, and we actually use here too. Like we do consume it, but then once they start to get really big, they are a really important food source for our rabbits. So we feed them a lot to our rabbits. Yeah, so it's like really good animal fodder. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Super useful.
So, like, these are plantains here then, right?
Let's see.
My,
Yeah.
you can't be 100% sure. My default is to always second guess that.
Yeah, all of these, absolutely, all of these are plantain. And then again, that's where I'll just like, if you want to know, you just grab one of the leaves and you do that like vein, that strain test. And feel free, I mean, these plantains can definitely take being. Feel free to pick one if you want to try that out.
And that portage chair.
Oh yeah, you like that? Nice. Yeah, you can often, because on the portage trails is often where you get the things that grow in the disturbed environments.
Yeah.
They got a bit of extra sun, and yeah, so you'll sometimes find edibles on the portage trail.
Yeah, and plantains are really nice non-native plant in the sense it's very well behaved. Like it only grows in the disturbed areas. And if you actually, there is a native variety of plantain that if you're ever in the backwoods, it's really like botanically very, like you wouldn't, it's like splitting hairs to tell one species from another. But there is one species of native plantain that grows in the forests. Yeah, so anywhere you find it, you can definitely use any species of that. Okay. Next one. So it's growing. Here's a patch that's blooming, which is really nice. So this is violets. There are probably at least 20 different species of violets that grow in Ontario. They can be any color, from this like beautiful dark purple to white with purple stripes to yellow. Every single species of violet is safe for consumption. So they always pretty much grow low to the ground. And it is common to see them growing in these dense mats. So you can see this dense mat here. And it's like dense patches growing all through the lawn. So both leaves and flowers are edible. So I'll harvest some of the leaves and just kind of show them to folks. So they are a heart-shaped leaf. They call it cordate, heart-shaped leaf. And then the flowers are what we call an irregular flower. So unlike a daisy, which is like perfectly symmetrical any way that you cut it, see how we cut it? It's only symmetrical down the middle. Like an orchid, exactly.
Gorgeous flower.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's one of the first things to bloom in the spring. So both leaves and flowers. The leaves of violets are actually exceptionally high in vitamin C. Like a third of a cup of violet leaves is your whole daily vitamin C. And the flowers, I don't know about the nutritional value of them, but they're so lovely to put in like, smell nice, and they're lovely to put in salads. And I actually have every year, it's like a very labor intensive process, but I do it just for fun, make a violet syrup. So you harvest the flowers, and then you steep them in hot water. And you strain out the flowers, and what you'll get is a tea, it's just a tea that's bright blue. And then I put it in a saucepan, and then you just have like your ratio. It's like often like 1 to 2, like it's like 2 cups of water, or the tea. It's like 1 cup of sugar. Or sorry, it's actually the other way around for syrup. 2 cups of sugar for 1 cup of tea. It's very strong. But you put the sugar in, and this is the one time. Everywhere else in my life, I'm like an organic cane sugar kind of girl. But when it comes to violet syrup, I will use white sugar, because the cane sugar will kind of make it go brown, but the white sugar will keep it bright. So you put it in the saucepan, and it will, like, you dissolve it, and then what's interesting, it'll be bright blue. And then if you add a few, like 2 tablespoons or so of lemon juice, it turns it like electric purple, like this purple. So it's super cool. It's like, if you even just like to see the chemistry of that is really fun.
Wow.
And then something I actually think I'm going to try this year is I saw someone do a recipe for jellies. So then they basically had that syrup, and then they mixed gelatin in it, and then made these like jelly, like yeah. So I'm like, for the only time of year I'll like use white sugar, it seems so worthwhile. And it's funny, they don't really taste that much, but it's so fun just to do the color, like to get the color and play with it.
Like
They're really
butterfly shoots.
Yeah,
Are you familiar with them?
totally.
their
People
pea
use
turns,
them
like,
to get the
electric
color.
purple,
Yeah, so it's kind of that same thing. It's butterfly pea is like much easier to use than violet, but this is the one that grows here, so that's what I use.
And is there any health benefits to this flower?
Not that I know of. The
vitamin
leaves
C.
are kind of where you're going to get most of the nutritional value. The other thing with the flowers is probably you'd have to like, I mean, just looking at the chemistry of them, I'm like, oh yeah, they're going to have flavonoids, but the amount that you probably have to consume to get any like benefit. But the leaves are kind of what's known to be the most benefit. I find with the leaves, really fresh is my favorite. So fresh in salads. If I'm doing an herbal pesto or something, that you can add them in. But generally, they're something that I'm going to eat fresh. Yeah, and I have everyone will get a chance to try some of the flowers, or feel free to come and taste one of the flowers on their own. The only thing, like, they literally just popped, so sometimes there's just like a bit of sand because we haven't had like a rain. Yeah, so the only thing I'll do is sometimes just tap it first. Like, that's always my like unconscious step, is to tap something to melt the sand off, and then just eat the flower. So if anyone wants to, help yourself.
So I don't myself in the book.
There's actually nothing poisonous here, so we're good. Yeah, and here's an interesting thing. So there's a garden hosta growing in behind there. You can eat the hosta shoots. Yeah. And it's another one of those, like asparagus. You eat them exactly like this stage when they're first coming up. Now, if you want, though, a nice, lovely, pristine-looking hosta, it's going to look a little raggedy if you harvest the shoots. So we actually have another hosta that grows like I've divided up my hostas, and I'll just like throw them in places I'm less likely to care about if they look nice, and then I'll eat those ones. Or you just steal some from your neighbor's garden. But yeah, these young hosta shoots are they really just taste, they're very similar to asparagus. Yeah. Okay. So I want to show you guys one more plant in the garden, and we're gonna go for a walk. So this is my garden. Doesn't have much to do with the people can spread it on the path.
If anyone's just joining in right now, I'm just going to step away for a second. So we're just we're running an edible wild plants walk on our homestead today. So we got a group here live on the land. We're having a ton of fun. And I'm basically just following Laura along as she's sharing a ton of wisdom about how to sustainably and ethically grow and forage edible and medicinal plants. So let's go for a walk back over there. If you're loving this broadcast, then we'd really appreciate you sharing it, giving it a like. Feel free to comment or ask questions as well as we go along, and I'll be following them as we go here.
That's always the caution I have around eating any type of flower that you get in like a floral arrangement or from a garden center. Is just know that there are things sprayed on it that are not like regulated for food, but like those little Johnny jump ups. So when pansies grow wild in a garden, they always kind of like revert back smaller, but all those ones you can still eat. So I want to show you guys one root. So there's a plant, they're actually all through the garden. So there's a native plant called evening primrose. But often it's funny, it's a native plant, but it grows in a lot of people's gardens as a weed. And I actually will grow them and let them make their way around the garden because they actually have a pretty good root. So this is a plant that's called a biennial. So it only lives for 2 years. So the last year it seeded and grew probably as like just like a small, like it would have been like last season. So when they overwintered, and then in the spring, this is what's called the Basil Rosette. So just the set of leaves that are all coming from a central stalk. Later in the summer, it will start to send out a big shoot. And then it will have these really quite large 4-petaled yellow flowers, and they're like a canary lemon yellow, really, and super delicate. The flowers are edible, but the reason that I actually let them, so every year I like when I'm cleaning up the spring gardens, we'll harvest a bunch, and then I'll always pick one patch to like let bloom and go to seed, because these are like a parsnip. So as long as I harvest them just from the young plants in the spring, so it's like, carrot. If anyone here has grown carrots before or parsnips before, they're like very finicky to seed, very finicky to weed. Where these guys are root crop that I can, like, I still harvest, still grow carrots and stuff, but like those guys get harvested in the fall, and then I always know that in our garden, if I always leave some evening primrose around, but in the spring I'll be able to get these, and they're like, we'll get lots, and we'll get a nice root crop. But yeah, not super sweet, so closer to a parsnip, but like a pretty good root veggie, especially for something that I didn't actually have to physically plant. So that's just like one root crop. So yeah, it's common as like a weed, but it is good to know that it is a native plant.
So it's common like in open areas, or
yeah, being so often meadows, and again more disturbed areas. Anyone with like a farm kind of gardens.
I read them right now.
Yeah.
All the things you're talking about. We just try to get rid of them, right?
Yeah.
Rather than thinking
I mean,
about
there's
them
a place like there. So for example, like this was so when we planted the peas, we got our pea crop, and then I knew that they were all through there, and I just said, okay, well, they're not competing with the peas anymore.
Good point.
So they can just have this spot, and then I knew that in the spring I would have a place to harvest some roots from.
Wow.
So sometimes it's like I try to, it's less work if I just let them do their thing. I'm actually going to put these back in the ground so that they're nice and fresh when I come to dig them. And that'll be, I will definitely, so I will only ever let like a handful go to seed, because otherwise we would probably have nothing but that plant. But because it's a plant of disturbed soils, it's going to be, at least in some sort of meadow environment, you're not going to find it like in a forest or, yeah.
I've found it on portage trails before, though, again, too. Yeah.
On portage trails.
On portage trails, yeah.
Okay, where
Or
there's
more likely in dry soil than places where you might have moss. It wouldn't be near moss.
Absolutely. It's definitely more of a
Yeah.
plant of dried spots. And then what's interesting to think from an ecological function, this is so cool. So after it goes to seed, it dies. And then that big taproot that I showed you guys, so if you imagine then that plant dies and then that root rots. So what the function of those plants is to actually then break up just compacted soils, and then that root is like rich in starches and sugars. So insects come in, it allows water to better penetrate into the ground. So those plants actually have a lot of really good important function for helping build the health of these soils. So it's another reason like we will kind of let them, because they are doing work in our gardens to make them a bit better over time. If I, with a little management, with working together.
So, question for you. So my doctor actually suggested evening primrose oil for menopausal, symptoms. So is it the root, or
It's
is it
actually
the leaves,
so
the flower,
it's the seed. So once the flower forms, it has a seed. The seeds are incredibly tiny, and then they press the seed for oil. So they actually, I feel like, because I've thought it before. I've tried so many ways to think of like how you could do it, but you would probably have to grow like this entire garden of nothing but evening primrose, and then have some sort of fancy like a machine that can separate the seed, and then they actually press it. But yeah, it is an important. But I don't know if anyone has really looked at if you can get the benefits from consuming it. But I know it is one that the seed is used for helping balance hormones. And, it is really.
I'll share a quick story just for anybody who
Yeah.
knows anybody suffering from hormonal migraines, like before your period every month. It just works like a charm when
We're going to go for a little walk away from there. I don't want to just follow Laura around with the camera all day long, just out of respect for her class there. But yeah, hopefully you folks enjoyed those. So Laura just went over dandelion, violet, hostas, and evening primroses, all as edible wild foods that are often found right around your garden, your lawn, great edibles. Just so folks know, I'm going to actually keep going for a little bit here if you're still interested. So I'm going to go on a little bit of tour. I'll go over a couple more wild edibles myself in a moment. I'm also going to show you around the homestead a little bit and show you where we grow our edible mushrooms. So we'll discuss that in just a moment here. But before I do that, I just wanted to mention, I've got our link for our website up there. So we have a whole host of wild edible food and drink products, things like wild leek vinegar, which is wild leeks infused in organic apple cider vinegar. We use that on like salads. We put it into stir fries. We put it into dressings, all kinds of fun stuff like that. We make a whole line of spices. So for example, we do a wild salt, and the wild salt has... Turn my ringer off. Anyways, the wild salt has wild leeks on it. It has spruce tips in it, and it has sweet gale catkins in it as well. And then it's cut with a salt. So it's a finishing salt that you can basically put on anything that you would normally use a salt on. So if these are kind of intriguing you, we also make bitters for both digestion, but also for making cocktails and delicious mocktails. So if all of these things are of interest with you, then yeah, go over and check out the website. I've got it listed down there, wildmuskoka.com. And we also run these edible plant walks. So if you happen to live in the Ontario area, feel free to join us. I believe all our walks are sold out for this year. They sell out fast. We're sold out. It's May right now. We're already sold out through the end of October. But get on our newsletter and you can join us on one in the future. So let's get back to chatting about plants. We're going to take a little bit of a detour from the wild plants for a second and just chat a little bit about our mushroom setup. I know some folks might be interested in that. And then we'll cover a couple more plants, and then we'll wrap up the broadcast here. If you have any questions as we go along, feel free to share. So I'm going to show you two things that we have going on here. Maybe we'll start with this one right here. Some of you may know that we also run a mushroom growing course. Beside me, we have what's called a log tower. So these are poplar logs that I cut green, and in between them, I actually took mycelium from oyster mushrooms and I put them in between the logs. I'm just trying to see if any stands out. There you go. So if you see that white in the middle of the log there, that white is actually oyster mycelium, and it's inoculating in between those two logs now. And that's why we call it a log tower. And what's going to happen in probably about 8 weeks or so, oyster mushrooms are going to start popping out from in between these cracks in between the logs there. So that's one technique we do, the log tower. Right here, we actually have a mushroom bed. So this is actually, so just like you'd have a garden bed, so this is a garden bed that grows mushrooms. Now it's in a shady spot. We're behind the house here. And I've got a whole bunch of poplar wood chips in here. And then we put a layer of straw over top of that. And we haven't actually inoculated this one yet. We're going to be inoculating it shortly with wine cap mushrooms. So we got oysters and wine caps growing right behind the house here. I'll take you down to the shiitake patch in a moment. But let's just go for a little walk around the garden. We'll look at a couple other things here. If you're just tuning in live, then then you may want to go back and watch the replay afterwards, because Laura talked about a bunch of wild foods there in the beginning. She talked about plantain. She talked about violet. Right here is a big, beautiful patch of sweetgrass. Oh my goodness, smells so lovely. So we're just going to walk into the garden here for a second, look at a couple other fun projects we have going on right now. Behind me, there's the garlic bread right now. So it's May 7th, I think, today, and our garlic's already sprouting out there. And I bet you our asparagus is going to start popping any day now. But another fun plant that I think would be great to chat about right now, this is a really good medicinal plant for lots of different things, but particularly for if you're dealing with respiratory issues, if you've got like some stuck congestion inside of your lungs. And this plant right here, this beautiful fuzzy plant, I feel like it would make a fantastic pillow to just sleep on it. This is called mullein. And this is a second-year plant that's coming up here. And when I say second-year plant, that means it's going to send a stalk up the middle of the plant this year. So it's a biennial plant. It has a 2-year life cycle, this mullein plant. And what basically happens, the first year it grows this, which we call like a Basil Rosette, where they all kind of grow from a central point, and it doesn't raise off the ground. So all the leaves come out of that central point. And then the second year, it'll basically send up this long, tall stalk. Let's see. Oh yeah, here's one right over here. Let's go take a quick look at that. So the second year, it sends up a big, tall stalk. And I bet you've seen these along the side of the road or highways and fields before. But this long stalk grows beautiful yellow flowers on it. So there's a couple of different things we do with the mullein plant. One of the ones that I do, probably the most common ones I do with it, is if I ever get a respiratory infection and it feels kind of stuck, like in my lungs, like I feel really congested deeply there, then what I'll actually do is I'll harvest these beautiful fuzzy green leaves, and I'll basically get a steamer going on my stove or a pot of boiling water. I'll put the mullein into it, and then I'll drape a blanket over my head, and I'll sit there and I'll actually inhale the mullein in down into my lungs, and it's phenomenal for helping break up phlegm. Now, as I say this, this is just to inspire you today for educational purposes. I don't recommend learning about herbal medicine from a live stream YouTube broadcast. You want to work with an actual herbalist. If you're interested in learning about wild medicine, then go over and check out our wild medicine program, where we actually dive a lot deeper into it. Today is really just for inspiration. So please don't do this, because there are things you can do wrong. You can actually develop a serious allergy to mullein, which can be detrimental to your health if you do this too often or don't know what you're doing. But just so you know, mullein is a plant that you could learn more about to be able to create these herbal steams to help break up congestion. The other thing that we do with it is we harvest those beautiful yellow flowers, and we'll make ear oil out of the flowers. So we basically infuse them in olive oil. And if you have like a surface level ear infection, not an inner ear infection, but an outer ear infection, I've actually fought off a few ear infections now with the mullein flowers infused in olive oil. So there's a neat one. And then the last one I'll just share here, this beautiful stalk right here. If you knock all of these buds off of here, these little flower buds, you see if I just scrape them off with my finger there, the stalk inside of or underneath those is actually great for doing a technique called the hand drill, where you rub the stalk in between your hands really fast. And you can literally start a fire by rubbing this against a cedar board. And that's something that I teach in my wilderness survival courses. I've also poured spruce sap into the little pockets, the little seeds there. And spruce sap, if you don't know, is very flammable. It also has medicinal benefits as well, spruce sap, by the way. But I've poured spruce sap into these little holes before, And then you can kite it on fire and actually use this mullein stick as a torch that'll burn for quite a long time. You might be surprised. So there's the mullein plant right there. So that's a real fun one if you didn't know it already. Let's take a quick look inside of the greenhouse over here. And then I'll show you the mushroom logs kind of as our last step. Oh, I got one other wild edible I want to show you in a second here. But quick little tour here. So we inside the greenhouse, we got lots of fun stuff going on. We got some lemon balm over here that we're going to be planting. Oh my goodness, I love rubbing lemon balm between my fingers, giving it a smell phenomenal. Lemon balm, all kinds of great medicinal benefits to having it. We've got all our herbs starting out here, things like oregano, things like thyme. There's all our strawberries coming from our planters. We got our early season green, so it's May 7th, and you can see our spinach and our tatsoi and our arugula. All three of those plants are really great early season plants. If you seed them, basically as soon as it's kind of just staying above freezing, they'll grow even when it's cold. And in fact, spinach and arugula and tatsoi, spinach specifically out of that group, actually grow better in the early spring than they do later in the season. If you plant spinach in the summertime, it'll often just bolt, meaning it just goes to seed and you don't get a lot of a harvest off of it. But if you plant it in the early part of the season, you're more likely to get a nice crop. And then this is a fun project. We're probably going to do another live stream when we actually plant these. But look at all these little sticks sticking out of the soil here. So these are actually all elderberry clippings. And those of you that have been following the Wild Muskoka journey for a while here, you'll know one of our favorite products that we sell is our elderberry syrup. A lot of people, now we sell it as a food product, but a lot of people buy it because of the known, for one, elderberry is an antioxidant, kind of like blueberries. But a lot of people know, and if you go to the Health Canada website, you can actually find a whole bunch of scientific studies on there that talk about the role of elderberry syrup in reducing the length and severity of colds and flus. So we make this wild-crafted elderberry syrup at Wild Muskoka. And this year we're going to be expanding our our elderberry patches. So we go and forage in a bunch of spots, but these are clippings that we actually bought from a place called Elderberry Grove out on the west coast of Canada. And what they basically do is in the wintertime, they take clippings. So they're a couple nodules long off of the last year's fresh growth on the elderberry plant. And then you put them in the fridge basically for the wintertime. They mailed them to us. And now we've gone and stuck these elderberry clippings into some pots. So they're going to start to root inside of the pot. Admittedly, we don't use any rooting hormone or anything like that. So it's literally just a clipping of the fresh growth of last year's elderberry plant. The clippings taken in the wintertime, and then in the spring, we stick it into the soil, and it's going to start to root on there. So then once these start to root a little bit, we're going to be going out and planting a whole field of elderberry bushes. So we'll do another live stream and some videos when we're planting the elderberry field. But for those of you that use our organic wild-crafted elderberry syrup, you might enjoy seeing how we're actually kind of expanding the elderberry farm and operation. If anyone's just tuning in right now, thanks for joining us. We're on a wild edible plant walk today, and Laura just did a couple presentations. I'm going to show you a couple other things around the homestead, and then we'll probably wrap this up kind of soon here. We're taking a little bit of a divergent from the wild edible plants and just talking about how we tend our wild homestead here. So another fun one here, this is a what they call a native plum tree behind me there. You can kind of see it up there. It's fairly large, and plums need basically a male and a female part to produce fruit. And you don't get them on the same bush. So you need basically a pollinator bush. But one thing that you can do that's really fun, so we have this native plum that's really established and doing quite well. But we don't have any actual nice edible plums here. So I went and took some grafts or some clippings, they call it scion wood, off of an Italian plum, these big, beautiful these big, beautiful purple plums. And what I'm going to be doing this year is actually grafting. So taking the clipping off of last year's growth on the Italian plum, and I'm basically going to make a cut and splice them into the Italian plum here. And then we're going to tape it up and leave it. And the cells should actually join each other and the bark heal and grow over top of it. And if I'm successful, we're actually going to have Italian plums branches that are actually growing out of what we call the rootstock or the native plum there. And then what'll be great about that is that the native plum here will actually pollinate the Italian plum And then we'll actually be able to have the 2 different plums growing out of the exact same bush, and hopefully that'll actually fruit. So why don't we look at one more wild edible before we wrap things up today? Oh, and maybe we'll look at the mushroom logs too if folks are interested in that. Laura is off with the group right now, so they've walked back into the woods. I'm pretty sure I'll lose my cell reception if I try and follow her. So I'm not gonna keep going with her, but I will show you guys a couple other things here quick. So another one of our favorite wild edibles, and this is one that we're actually establishing on the homestead, although you can harvest it off in the wild. This one here is stinging nettle, if you're not familiar with that one. Look at that. And it's just starting to pop up. Let's see if I do it that way and kind of look down. Now, you might be surprised to think that stinging nettle is an edible, but it's actually chock full of nutrients. I would even argue that stinging nettle is probably healthier than are more nutrient dense than most of the vegetables you're buying in your average grocery store. And it grows everywhere. A lot of people think of it as a weed and even an invasive because stinging nettle, well, one, because it stings you, right? So if you were to touch the stem or the underside of the leaf, it's got this thing called formic acid in it. And it causes like an allergic kind of reaction, and you'll get a little bit of swelling and a little bit of stinging. It doesn't last too long usually, but it can be quite uncomfortable. But that formic acid reaction is actually killed as soon as it's kind of, the one way to kill it is to actually cook it. So if you steam it, it basically kills it instantly. So there's a few things that we'll do with the stinging nettle. One of the most common ones is to make stinging nettle tea. So we'll harvest these young green shoots. They're a little small to harvest yet, but give it another week. You know, when they're this tall, we'll cut those fresh leaves off and we'll just put them in the teapot, pour boiling water over it. That neutralizes this formic acid, and then we'll drink it as a tea. And I can't even list them all off, but vitamins, minerals, micronutrients, incredibly healthy medicinal stuff. On top of that, it's also a natural spinach source. And, you know, in this time where food prices are going through the roof, when we're having supply chain issues, when I'm really worried about food security and kind of what's around the next corner, a lot of gardeners are fighting to get the stinging nettle out. We're actually allowing this stinging nettle to basically grow anywhere it wants on our homestead because it's a perennial food source that, as I said, I would argue is healthier than most of the vegetables that you're going to buy in the grocery store. And it comes back every year as a perennial. So it's a phenomenal resource and a phenomenal food that's free and comes back every year on its own, takes almost no work. We don't need to weed it. We don't need to tend it. All we have to do is harvest it and consume it. We also make stinging nettle pesto. And if you've ever tried our Gamasio spice, so if you look at the link there, www.wildmuskoka.com, we make a spice called Gamasio. And one of the main ingredients in it is this dried stinging nettle leaf. And we cut it with some other fun stuff. I think there's some oregano in there. We put in, what else is in there? There's sesame seeds in there. There's just a touch of salt in there. But it's a phenomenal spice to put on your eggs, put on a baked potato, put on a salad. We love it on popcorn. So if you want to get some of that good stinging nettle nutrient into your life, then I would suggest trying our Gamasio or learning to harvest stinging nettle on your own. So I think I'm going to maybe leave it there for now. We've been going almost 45 minutes here. As I said, if you're just tuning in near the end of this cast, then just know that you may want to go back and watch the beginning, because we started this off today with my wife, Laura, who was leading a in-person live edible plant walk on our land. And so she talked about dandelions, she talked about violets, she talked about hostas, she talked about evening primrose. So you can go back and watch those at the beginning of those. And I hope you enjoyed this cast. Feel free to leave us some comments, ask some questions. We'll go back in there and check on them. And if you enjoyed it, then consider sharing this with your friends and go check out all of our wild food and drink treats over at wildmuskoka.com. All right, I'll leave it there, everybody. Signing off. Cheers.